When, on October 3, 2025, Dame Sarah Mullally was announced as the next Archbishop of Canterbury, the first woman to hold the highest office in the Church of England, it was the culmination of decades of movement in the Church. However, not everyone in the Church, not even all the bishops, have moved along with the Church's new policies, and several of the bishops won't even take communion from the new Archbishop. They have the official right to behave this way under a long-standing agreement, but there's also a movement to change the rules. If you ask when the Church of England first licensed women, you're likely to hear guesses that it was in the 70s or 80s, but things actually go further back at least to 1862, when Elizabeth Ferrard became the first deaconess of the church. This wasn't a ministerial office, rather a lay role of service in the church. Today, the church honors Ferrard with a commemoration day. It was over a century until the next change to the office of women took place, when February 1987 was established as the date that women could now be ordained as deacons after a 320 to 83 vote of synod. This was a big change. Women could now be styled reverend and could perform marriages and baptisms. Since that time, more and more women have been ordained to this office. In 2019, for the first time, more women were ordained as deacons in the Church of England than men. It wasn't as long of a wait for the next change. The next step was the priesthood. Just 5 years after the first women were ordained as deacons, women's ordination as priest was approved, and the first women became priests in the church 2 years later in 1994. Now, women could be the head of a parish and lead in communion. But there was one further step: the office of bishop. This one took another 20 years, including a failed vote in 2012. But in 2014, canon law of the church was changed to allow women as bishops, and Reverend Libby Lane was consecrated to that office as the first female bishop in 2015. Now, the highest office in the church, Archbishop of Canterbury, will be held by a woman when Mullally is installed in January 2026. Certainly by this time, everyone in the Church of England has come to terms with the ordination of women, right? Well, not so fast. It actually comes as a surprise to many lifelong members of the church when they find out that there are still many pockets of the church that have serious issues with the ordination of women and even have canonical structures that uphold their right to resist from the inside. There were worries back in 1992 that the vote to ordain women as priests might not pass. It would take a 2/3 majority from 3 houses: bishops, clergy, and laity, and there were voices in strong opposition. Bishops passed it by 39 to 13, 75%. Clergy was closer, 176 to 74, about 70% to 30. But the nail-biter was the House of Laity. The vote fell short of 2/3 of the body, but some of the members abstained, which means that they didn't count as part of the percentage. So in the end, among those who actually voted, the vote was 169 to 82. That's 67.3% in favor. Women became priests by just 2 votes. With such thin margins, it was important to get as many people on board as possible. One thing that assisted with that was the promise, set into law, that parishes that would not accept a woman as a minister would have their wishes honored. Beyond that, another law was passed. A law, because the Church of England is a state church, and so church laws are literally state laws too and published on the UK Parliament's website. But this other law established a special role called a provincial episcopal visitor. These would be bishops, also known as flying bishops, who would come to minister to churches that didn't want a bishop who is involved with ordaining women to visit their church. Now, these parishes might still be under such a bishop, or after 2014 may even be under a female bishop, but for church visits and ministry by a bishop, the provincial episcopal visitor would come in instead. The law establishing this stated, "The integrity of differing beliefs and positions concerning the ordination of women to the priesthood should be mutually recognized and respected." Now, this is where we begin to see some of the internal fault lines in the Church of England. There's long been different camps within the church, and today is no exception. Let's look at some congregations to see them. Holy Trinity Brompton, stylized today as HTB Church, is a multi-site church in the London Metro with a £10 million budget and a 100-plus person staff, which some have thought was non-denominational before realizing it's actually an Anglican church. It's evangelical and opposes same-sex marriage, but it's also egalitarian and has women clergy. Quite different in appearance, at St. Hilda's Church, Grangetown, worship can look like this, or this, and they advertise a Saturday Mass and Rosary with Mass offered according to the Roman Rite and public recitation of the Rosary. A term used in the Church of England for a church like this is traditional Catholic. because this parish does not accept women priests and utilizes the provincial episcopal visitor. These churches may be called Anglo-Catholic too, but traditional Catholic is used to distinguish them from the Anglo-Catholic churches that do have women as priests, for example. One case of that is St. Mary Magdalene Munster Square, which looks very much liturgical and high church like St. Hilda's, but has women as priests and a pride flag in their social media profiles. In another corner of the Church of England, here's part of the family service at Holy Trinity Church, Wallington, which is evangelical and much more low church, with the homily often given by a minister in jeans. They talk of serving Holy Communion instead of Mass, and it's only once a month in the regular services, though there is the option for a traditional communion service available at 3 p.m. on the first Sunday of the month. The style is very different from the traditional Catholics, but like them, this church too utilizes the provincial episcopal visitor and has no women as priests. St. Bride's Church in Liverpool self-identifies as progressive inclusive. They don't have the Anglo-Catholic emphasis, and in addition to having women as clergy, they host a monthly open table community and march in the Pride Parade. That's not to say these are the only types of congregations in the Church of England, but here's the gist. A church being part of the Church of England tells you something about them, but there's a lot that it doesn't tell you. There are plenty of churches that may belong to the same diocese and yet have very little to do with each other. But the traditional Catholics and the complementarian evangelicals in the church have some things in common, which is that their priests are all men, they get a visiting bishop who has not been involved with ordaining women, and they want the right to keep it that way. So, how many bishops and parishes limit women's ministries or do not fully accept women as priests and bishops? In addition to the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, there are 106 other bishops. The Church of England has 12,500 active congregations. According to Watch, an organization seeking full equality of women in ministry in the Church of England, of these, 8 bishops, or 7.5%, and 587 churches, or 4.7%, limit women's ministries or do not fully accept women as priests and bishops. Martine Osborne, vicar of St. Michael's Church in London, was interviewed on the Canadian radio program As It Happens and spoke about how this arrangement in the church affects the abilities of the incoming Archbishop of Canterbury. Osborne said, "Although the Church of England does allow female priests and bishops, it also does allow clergy, bishops, and churches to not accept them. It's a weird, complicated setup, and what it does mean is that there are, for example, 7 of her serving bishops who will not receive communion from her. There's one who doesn't believe that she should have authority over men. There are 586 churches that continue to limit women's ministry. So in those churches, she either wouldn't be able to preside over the bread and wine, or she might not be able to preach. So we're still wrestling with a lot of institutionalized discrimination." Those who hold the traditional view of the roles of bishops or priests would doubtless challenge their position being characterized as discrimination, but there can be no doubt that at least for now their position is institutionalized. That is, there's official policy on the institutional books that protects their exercise of their viewpoints. In 2014, when the ordination of women as bishops was first permitted, there was recognition that some new rules needed to be put in place. In 2015, that was done by the formation of the 5 guiding principles, which must be agreed to for someone to be ordained in the church. Here they are. 1. Now that legislation has been passed to enable women to become bishops, the Church of England is fully and unequivocally committed to all orders of ministry being open equally to all, without reference to gender, and holds that those whom it has duly ordained and appointed to office are true and lawful holders of the office which they occupy, and thus deserve due respect and canonical obedience. 2. Anyone who ministers within the Church of England must be prepared to acknowledge that the Church of England has reached a clear decision on the matter. 3. Since it continues to share the historic episcopate with other churches, including the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, and those provinces of the Anglican Communion which continue to ordain only men as priests or bishops, the Church of England acknowledges that its own clear decision on ministry and gender is set within a broader process of discernment within the Anglican Communion and the whole Church of God. 4. Since those within the Church of England who, on grounds of theological conviction, are unable to receive the ministry of women bishops or priests, continue to be within the spectrum of teaching and tradition of the Anglican Communion, the Church of England remains committed to enabling them to flourish within its life and structures. And 5. Pastoral and sacramental provision for the minority within the Church of England will be made without specifying a limit of time and in a way that maintains the highest possible degree of communion and contributes to mutual flourishing across the whole Church of England. The Bishop of Ebbsfleet, Rob Munro, is one of the provincial episcopal visitors, and as all clergy, has assented to the 5 principles. He's addressed the contradiction that some people see in accepting the first point, saying, "How can I assent to something I disagree with?" One of the concerns that some have expressed is that they cannot in conscience agree with the first principle. However, this is to misconstrue what is being required, as well as the meaning of the 5 principles. What is being required is assent, not agreement. As Stephen Hoffmeyer, Queen's Counsel, has put it, assenting merely requires acknowledgement of what the Church of England has done as an entity. It does not require the individual to agree personally with the commitment or the decision. It is important to realize, too, that the 5 principles are governed by the words introducing them. They need to be read one with the other and held together in tension rather than applied selectively. This means that each principle must be read in a way that produces consistency with the others, not inconsistency. Thus, the first principle cannot mean that each and every person in the Church of England is fully and unequivocally committed to all orders of ministry being equally open to all, irrespective of gender, because the 4th principle respects the position of those who disagree. The 5 principles give important safeguards to those who are in favor and those who are not in favor of women bishops and priests. When asked about his own position before his appointment, the present Bishop of Ebbsfleet said he is willing to assent to the 5 principles on the grounds that they promote mutual respect and do not require him to act contrary to his theological convictions. When asked to give assent to the 5 principles, ordinands and others could therefore consider answering that they are willing to assent on the same grounds as the Bishop of Ebbsfleet. That being said, there's now some effort to overturn this exception. In April 2025, the Church Times reported that Watch launched a campaign to abolish the 5 guiding principles. Watch put out a clarifying statement in May which said, "Since Watch's Not Equal Yet conference in March, there has been a lot of commentary in the media by those in favor of keeping legal discrimination against women. Commentary that, frankly, if it was being made by a woman, would probably be described as strident or hysterical. So let's be clear. Watch is not calling for the 5 guiding principles to be ripped up. We are simply calling for General Synod to review the arrangements and consider whether to set a date in the future when they should come to an end. This end might, for example, mean deciding that beyond a certain point, the Church would no longer ordain men who don't fully accept equality in ministry for women. No one would be forced to leave the Church. Whatever the original intentions regarding the permanency or expected obsolescence of the arrangements made in 2014, it is entirely valid for Synod to consider amending them and putting in a sunset clause which would, of course, require a 2/3 majority in each house." Seeing as the group that opposes women's ordination to the priesthood or consecration as bishops is such a small minority, it doesn't seem difficult to imagine the 5 guiding principles being sunsetted like Watch is calling for. So those who hold the minority view were certainly curious who the new Archbishop of Canterbury would be and whether he, or as it turns out, she, would be likely to support the removal of the principles or would seek to continue them. Munro made a statement after the selection of Mullally, saying in part, "I would like, on behalf of the Ebbsfleet Network, to offer our congratulations to the Bishop of London, Sarah Mullally, on her nomination to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. The appointment of an archbishop who is a woman will be a significant milestone for our denomination and for the wider Anglican communion. It presents particular challenges for those who have a complementarian understanding of Scripture and the roles of men and women in ministry, but Bishop Sarah has a long track record of gracious engagement and real understanding of the particular theological convictions we hold. I have no doubt she will continue to work hard to enable the 5 guiding principles to be upheld with a clear conscience and in a way that contributes to mutual flourishing across the whole Church of England. There is a need to maintain the integrity of my role as a complementarian bishop called to serve resolution churches across the whole country, yet with a legal title in the Diocese of Canterbury. I am confident from my past experience working with Bishop Sarah in London that we can work together to ensure my role upholds complementarian theological convictions and with appropriate spiritual oversight." Another one of the provincial episcopal visitors, Right Reverend Paul Thomas, the Bishop of Oswestry, is the chairman of Forward in Faith, an organization formed in 1992 in response to the allowance of women as priests. He responded to Mullally's appointment with a letter in which he said in part, "For those who advocated for that change, news of the Bishop of London's nomination to the See of Canterbury will be the cause of much rejoicing. To Catholic Christians, however, who faithfully seek to live out their vocation in the Church of England, today's news is likely to be received more mutedly and reflectively, perhaps even with some concern. The bishop's reference to Catholic Christians in the Church of England reflects his ministry mainly to those Anglican parishes that identify as traditional Catholic, but it also reminds some onlookers of the option to go where women are not bishops or priests at all, the Roman Catholic Church. For most Anglicans, theological and other considerations make this unappealing. However, there's plenty of reason to see these traditional Catholics as potential candidates for crossing the Tiber. That's the informal term for joining the Roman Catholic Church. Not least among those reasons are that in 2010, 2 of the active provincial episcopal visitors resigned their position, along with another active bishop and 2 retired bishops, to join the Roman Catholic Church. This was some of the earliest movement into the newly formed Personal Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, a Catholic structure allowing Anglicans to become Catholic while retaining much of their Anglican liturgy and pastoral heritage. Today, the Ordinariate has 42 missions in the UK. For more info on that, watch this video. In 2021, another of the provincial episcopal visitors resigned to join the Roman Catholic Church. The organization that the Right Reverend Paul Thomas is chairman of, Forward in Faith, uses the Roman Catholic Church's position as part of their argument against women's ordination in their pamphlet, Women as Bishops and Priests, What's the Problem?, even though the Roman Catholics aren't mentioned by name. The pamphlet states, ordaining women to the episcopate and priesthood lacks any precedent in the history of Orthodox Christianity. It also lacks Catholic consent, the consent of the great majority of the universal church with which the Church of England claims to share the threefold ministry. It is not a change that the Church of England is at liberty to make. So here's where things land right now. Number 1, there is a minority, but not an insignificant one, that holds convictions about men in the priesthood and episcopate. Number 2, right now, these bishops, priests, and parishes are allowed to have these convictions upheld to a great extent. Number 3, as a result, the incoming archbishop will find herself unable to serve communion in many of the parishes in the church that she leads. Number 4, there are those who want to see the protections for these objectors to be removed from the church. Number 5, some of the objectors view incoming Archbishop Mullally as likely to continue to support the protections, despite the fact that they bring limitations on herself. The story here is still being written. Mullally will find herself being watched in regards to the impending worldwide Anglican schism and her now disputed role as first among equals in the Anglican Communion, but also in other areas, like the Church of England's positions on same-sex blessings in marriage. But there is a group that may be watching her most closely on this point and wondering, after so many changes to women's roles in the church decade over decade, whether the status quo will be shaken up here too.